Philippa Page, and I work for Flock Health Limited, and I'm a sheep vet working with farmers around the country, flock health planning wise, and we're coming up to an important time around pre and post lambing nutrition, so hopefully these slides will give you some information around feeding the ewe through late pregnancy and on into early lactation. This short webinar is going to look at these principles of feeding the ewe in late pregnancy and post-lambing, and we're going to cover these topics with a bit of information on each one to help when you're planning your feed budget for this important time of year. The aim throughout the whole year of sheep production should be to have our ewes in optimum condition, body condition at lambing time. Lambing time is the most crucial part in a ewe's life, and it's the time at which nutritionally they can be on a knife edge, they are more susceptible to disease, and their future productivity will be affected if their nutrition and if their body condition score isn't at its optimum. So throughout the year, that should be our focus, of always having them in correct body condition score when they're due to lamb. So ewes that are fit at lambing time will have the ability to mobilise their body reserves, particularly once they've lambed. They will also be able to mobilise reserves to support fetal growth and to support colostrum production and udder development. They will be fit, so they will be able to lamb easier, and their mothering ability should be optimum, and they should be less at risk of having difficulties with lambing, such as head first lambs, a head and a leg, etc., can all be caused by ewes that are over body condition score. So it's a crucial time. Also, a fit ewe will have a lower risk of metabolic disease, and she will have a lower risk of prolapse. All two diseases that cause problems in many flocks at lambing time. So having that ewe in the correct body condition score will help reduce dramatically those diseases, and the knock-on effects are that we will increase our lamb births and reduce our lamb mortality. Also, having the correct body condition will mean that colostrum quality and colostrum quantity will be optimal. So all of these things lead to a more productive lambing, a healthier ewe, and ultimately a more profitable ewe. So it's crucial that when ewes are coming up to the late pregnancy period, we assess their body condition score so we can make decisions based upon where those ewes are and how we can best feed them to optimise their health when they start to lamb. The target body condition score at lambing time will vary depending on the breeds that we have in the flock, but they should be, for a lowland ewe, we're looking at around 3 to 3.5 body condition score, and for a hill ewe, we're looking at around 2.5 body condition score. There's a table there that gives you some indications about what to feel for when we are body condition scoring the sheep, but really a good guide is that they need to be fit when you are feeling them with your hand, and you must feel them. It's not something that can be done by eye. So when you've got the ewes in, if you feel behind the ribs with the full palm of your hand over the spine, and you need to move it from side to side, feeling that hand underneath the lumbar regions of the spine, and then down onto the spine itself, and firm pressure before you can feel those bony structures indicates that ewe's fit, just like as if you were picking a fat lamb. If those bony structures are easy to feel, then those ewes are under body condition score, and provisions need to be made to feed them appropriately or to group them appropriately. So that's how, just a quick cover of how to check for body condition. The reason we want them in correct body condition, as I've mentioned previously, is so that they can move and mobilise their body reserves to meet the demands for energy and protein in the late stages of pregnancy and early lactation, when they can't quite get enough food in, when they're on a nutritional knife edge. If they've got reserves to mobilise, they will meet those demands and not suffer themselves at any cost, and that's what we're aiming for, to have reserves, but the ewes themselves not losing too much, so that we struggle to get them back into the condition for the next mating period. And ewes can lose around 75 to up to 200 grams per day of body weight to contribute to the deficit in energy and protein, and that could be crucial if we are looking at budgeting feed, or if we're looking at trying to match grass growth to grazing ewes in that early period. If we've got ewes that can mobilise their reserves, then they're going to be far better adapted to still producing milk for their growing lambs and to still holding their condition until the energy and protein can be met by that growing grass. During the final stages of pregnancy, so really in the final 6 weeks, there is a significant change and increase in demand by the ewe for energy and protein, and that change depends upon her body condition score and how many lambs she's got inside, and it's important that those ewes are fed accordingly. Some ewes will increase their energy demand, particularly twins. They will double their energy demand up to 20 megajoules of energy a day compared to the normal 10 megajoules of energy for maintenance. So it's important that we know in the flock who the sheep are and how they can be grouped accordingly. So we can group the ewes in terms of their raddle mark, so we know when they're going to lamb, and we can group them in terms of their scan, so how many lambs are expected, and then also we can look at grouping them in terms of body condition and in age. It's important that we maximise the amount of energy going into the different groups according to their requirements, and certainly with yearlings and first-time lambers, be that yearlings or ewe lambs, it's better to keep them as a separate group so that we can monitor their feed intake and we can optimise their dry matter intake as well. Also important is to look at forage and analyse our forage ahead of the late pregnancy, feeding period, so that we know how much energy and how much protein that forage is going to supply. Then we're able to match and supplement the diet accordingly. With good quality forage, ewes that are just bearing singles may not necessarily need supplementation. Ewes that are carrying twins will need extra supplementation, and from a profitability and cost point of view, we can then look at who we need to feed, and if we've got the foraging analysts, we can work out how much extra is needed in the diet to supplement those feeds. So our aim in the flock is to have them as consistent as possible in terms of body condition and have them as consistently close to optimum. And in general, if that can be our aim throughout the year, it will make feeding them more cost effective and definitely more effective in terms of supplying the right amount of energy and protein. So that is our aim, but the reality is that we will have using the group that are below body condition and possibly ones that are over. So when we determine how we feed them, really it should be determined on the ewe's body condition score, but also their scanning percent, so how many lambs they're expected to deliver, to rear, and their raddle mark, so how close to lambing they are, and also possibly their age in terms of whether they're ewe lambs or whether they're shearlings. So once we've body condition scored, we can use that information really well to divide the ewes up where possible and feed them accordingly. That will have good cost saving benefits, and also it will be benefiting the ewes. Obviously in late pregnancy, the demand for energy and protein increases significantly in terms of megajoules. In a twin bearing ewe, her demand for energy doubles in that last 6 weeks of pregnancy. This is to match the growth of the fetus. 75% of its growth happens in that last 6 weeks, and also it's to match the demands for udder development and for future milk production, but crucially colostrum production and colostrum quality, which is essential for lamb survival. And also we want optimum lamb birth weights. The more optimum those birth weights are, the better chance of survival they have. So they are more likely to be vigorous, they're more likely to get up and suck, they're more likely to have adequate brown fat reserves and adequate circulating glucose. So as they're born, they are less likely to suffer from hypothermia, and they've got internal reserves ready to be able to see them through that first crucial period where they need to get up and they need to suck colostrum. So when we're feeding in late pregnancy, that's how we should be thinking, and that's what we're targeting. And we need to, and if we can group the ewes, we can target that more closely and more accurately to get the best from the feed that we're putting in front of them. It's crucial that we get our forage analysed so that we know how much energy and protein is being supplied by the forage, so that we can then most cost effectively match how much supplement we need to give. Whatever supplement we use, we need to make sure that the metabolizable energy of that supplement is higher than what the forage is supplying, so that we can supply less of it to supplement the overall diet. The more concentrate we add to the diet, the more upset we will cause in the rumen, because the rumen is far better suited to a forage-based diet. We can check the diet by looking at metabolic profiles, so we can, together with your vet, blood sample the ewes 3 weeks before lambing, and that will give us an indication of how much energy and protein they're getting from the diet, and then we've still got time to make adjustments if necessary. Together, energy and protein, sufficient levels of both of those components are crucial in the last 3 weeks, because that's driving colostrum production and volume, it's helping udder development, and it's also helping with fetal growth, so that we've got viable, vigorous, healthy live weight lambs that will also have their own good levels of brown fat that will supply them with energy and prevent them suffering from hypothermia when they're first born. Where we have inadequate supplies of energy, it can lead us to disease such as pregnancy toxemia, which we've previously mentioned. So it's important that we match the energy with the demands of the ewe. A single bearing ewe may be able to meet her energy and protein requirements from forage alone, provided that we know what that forage is supplying, whereas a twin bearing ewe is likely to need supplementation. We could also use things like harvested roots, fodder beet, etc. can be quite useful to supply extra energy, and it's good for rumen function. So there's a few options that we can use to supplement a forage diet, but without knowing what's in there, we can't make those decisions. When a ewes getting to lambing time, she's nutritionally on a bit of a knife edge, where she's struggling to maximise and meet her energy and protein demands, really by the fetus that's growing inside her. It's decreasing the space in the abdomen, and this affects how much dry matter she can actually take in. So dry matter intake can be a limiting factor, so we need to try and maximise that. Usually it's how the food is presented will affect dry matter, and it's one of the biggest causes. So we may not have enough space for all the sheep to feed at any one time. If we're feeding ad lib or we're feeding a TMR, we can look at 15 to 23 centimetres is an okay requirement feed space, but if we are restricted feeding, that needs to be greater. We can feed concentrated feed. It helps if we feed that on the ground sometimes, provided that we've got a clean underfoot dry straw yard that we're feeding them on. It will help the grazing behaviour, it will help them slow down the intake of that concentrated feed. The sheep will find it and it will just help, it helps them exercise, it could help reduce the chances of prolapse, etc. So there's things that we can do there. Making sure the feed's not spoiled, and if it's mouldy, if it's dusty, it won't be palatable and they won't eat it. That will affect dry matter intake. So how it's presented is important, and sometimes chop length will affect dry matter intake. So long fibrous chop that we can sometimes get in round bales can affect intake. So it may be that we need to present that differently, moving feeders around, adding an extra feeder into a yard, moving the forage around daily so that all sheep can access it. And also important, sometimes forgotten, is the availability of water and clean water. The more water they drink, the better their dry matter intakes will be, but it needs to be clean, not contaminated with straw, and it needs to look healthy and palatable without any muck in there, etc. Ewes can be drinking around 4.5 litres a day. Once they're lactating, that can go up to 10 litres. So the water supply is really important from a dry matter intake point of view. After lambing, a ewe's energy and protein increases massively. A twin bearing ewe will increase her energy demands by up to 60% and her protein demands by up to 44%. And this is to match milk production, to maximise lamb growth. Now her voluntary feed intake increases slowly, but she does have the capacity to be eating eventually up to 3 to 3.5% of her body weight. So this gives us an idea of how much feed we need to have in front of her, and also an idea of the demands. So if she can't meet that for whatever reason, if it's not provided in terms of forage or supplementary feed, or if the grass growth isn't there, she will start to mobilise her body reserves to match that demand. And this is where it's very important that she's got the reserves to be able to do that. If not, in severe cases, she will fall into negative energy balance, and where she can't meet her energy demands, the milk production will suffer, and in turn her lambs will suffer. So then we're looking at delays to 8-week weights, delayed growth, and other things that are affected with poor nutrition in lambs, such as the effects of coxy, the effects of in the immediate term, the effects of the weather, hypothermia, etc. So a good plane of nutrition is what those lambs need to thrive. Lactation peaks around 3 to 4 weeks after birth, which can vary depending on how many lambs she's got. So we need to make sure that the feed is on a rising plane up to that point to supply those lambs when they're taking the most milk off her. Where we haven't done that, we may see increased cases of mastitis, and we can also see rapid losses in body weight, which will then go on to affect her throughout the rest of the production cycle. So matching that post-lambing nutrition is crucial. In terms of matching requirements, particularly where we may be looking at grass and the availability of grass, we can look at sward height as a measure, and where we've got sward heights of 4 centimetres or less, they're certainly going to need some supplementary feed, possibly in terms of hard feed. And where we've got sward heights where the sheep are being turned out onto pastures where it's 3 centimetres or less, they're going to likely to need forage and supplementary feed, so hard feed and possibly fodder beet or hay or silage to supplement that. Where we don't feed enough or supply enough energy and protein after lambing is where we quite often see cases of, or more cases of, mastitis. Obviously also we need to take into effect the weather conditions and the likely effects that is going to have on the lambs and their requirements for milk and the frequency of visits to the udder. So it's important that we're able to adapt and change depending on the environment and depending on what grass availability we've got once we've turned the sheep out. If they're housed because it's early lambing or because they're housed due to weather, they will certainly need supplementary forage and hard feed. We can look at body condition score and possibly group them in terms of how much condition loss can occur, and that can successfully help match that energy protein demand. But as mentioned before, this is where it's useful that ewes are in the optimum body condition at lambing time. So when we're looking at matching the requirements, we need to look at what is available in terms of grass. If they're spring lambing flocks, how's the grass growing? If they're early lambing or they're housed due to adverse weather, we definitely need to supplement them with forage and hard feed, depending on which groups we are looking at. The level of feeding will depend on, again, body condition score. So if those ewes in good condition can afford to lose some, and that will supply those energy levels. So really important that we're still monitoring and measuring the ewes in terms of where they're at from a body condition point of view. And then when we're looking at grass availability, a crude measure is looking at sward height out into the paddocks, the turnout paddocks. Where we've got sward heights of 4 centimetres or less, we need to feed them supplementary feed, be that fodder beet or concentrated feed. Where swards height are even lower than 4 centimetres, so down at 3, we need to give them feed and forage. So we need to keep monitoring to make sure that we're matching the growth requirements. If we've done the hard work, we've got the lambs out, they're alive, they've survived that initial period, we then need to make sure that they continue to grow. And they will only do that if they've got sufficient milk, if the ewes milking enough to provide for them. And also, she needs sufficient energy and protein to reduce the chances of her suffering from mastitis and reduce the chances of her losing too much body condition. Because now we're in this lactating period, we are already thinking of the next stage, which is going to be mating again once she's weaned, and we need to make sure that she doesn't lose too much condition because of the knock-on effects that it's going to have for the rest of the cycle.